The Avro Lancaster is arguably the most famous British heavy bomber of World War II. But what made it famous? Daring raids like Operation Chastise, where 617 Squadron Lancasters attacked German hydro dams with bouncing bombs in the middle of the night. The huge dams could not be damaged from above by bombing. An explosion had to be set off under the water near the dam to breach it. The dams were guarded by nets in the water to stop torpedoes, so a plan was devised to skip bombs over the water to the dam wall instead. After test dropping different shaped bombs, a cylinder design was found to be the most successful, and it was given the code name Upkeep. A device was mounted to the Lancasters to spin the bombs fast enough to make them skim across the water, hit the dam, and sink before detonating. For this to work, the Lancasters had to be flown at exactly 60 feet above the lake, at exactly 232 miles per hour. Then they had to release the bomb at the exact right moment in pitch black conditions under enemy anti-aircraft fire. With a 500 RPM backspin, Upkeep could bounce for 800 yards before sinking. The part I found most intriguing about this raid was reading about Wing Commander Guy Gibson flying alongside other Lancasters on their bombing run with his own. He would fire his gun turrets at the German defences around the dam as the other Lancaster aimed and released its bomb. The idea behind this wasn't because it would suppress the enemy guns, but to draw their fire away from the bomber making its bomb run so it had a better chance of hitting the target. The reconnaissance photos the next day confirmed 2 of the 3 dams were breached. The flooding had swept down 40 miles of the Ruhr Valley, destroying 12 war-related factories and flooded thousands of acres of farmland. One pilot was gobsmacked at the sight of a church steeple just visibly poking up out of the floodwaters. The mission was a success, but it came at a huge cost. 8 of the 19 Lancasters were lost, with 6 shot down and 2 crashing into power lines while flying in at low level. 53 aircrew were killed and 3 were taken prisoner of war. Another series of famous Lancaster raids were against the German battleship Tirpitz, Operation Paravane, Operation Obviate, and Operation Catechism. All 3 raids faced incredible risks like heavy enemy anti-aircraft fire and were beyond the range of fighter escort. Tirpitz was based in a Norwegian fjord and posed too much of a threat to shipping in the North Sea. It needed to be taken out. The Royal Navy and its Fleet Air Arm hit Tirpitz on several raids, but its bombs were just not big enough to penetrate the armour and do enough damage. RAF Bomber Command got the call up and a plan was made to sink the Tirpitz with 12,000-pound armour-piercing tallboy bombs delivered by Lancasters. The tallboy was designed by the same man behind Upkeep, Barnes Wallis, and it was an engineering masterpiece. It was capable of breaking the sound barrier in freefall if dropped from a high enough altitude. The tallboy was expensive to make, with over a week worth of machining needed just to complete the casing. The crews of Lancasters carrying tallboy bombs were instructed not to waste them. If the target was obscured by cloud or smoke, don't drop them, bring them home, they're too expensive to waste. The first raid was on September 15, 1944, carried out by Bomber Command's Elite 617 and 9 squadrons. This involved the Lancasters flying from England to Yagodnik airfield in Russia a few days earlier and waiting for a gap in the weather to attack. The defences around Tirpitz were very well organised, and at the first sign of an incoming attack, they could flood the entire area with a smokescreen, making it impossible to see or bomb the battleship. The idea with attacking from Russia instead of the UK was the Germans were not expecting a raid from that direction. The Lancasters took off on the morning of the 15th and were spotted by German defences 10 minutes out from the Tirpitz. They started filling the fjord with a smokescreen. Only the first flight of Lancasters managed to release their tallboys before the Tirpitz was completely obscured. After that first flight, they were just aiming for where the anti-aircraft fire was coming up through the smokescreens. 17 tallboys were dropped in total. One of the tallboys missed the Tirpitz and hit land near it. You can still see the crater there to this day. Another tallboy released from 20,000 feet reached 750 miles per hour before it plunged directly through the foredeck, out through the bottom of the hull, before detonating in the water and causing massive damage to the bow. The Tirpitz took on 2,000 tons of water in the bow, and in the aftermath the damage was assessed to take at least 9 months to repair to a seaworthy condition. The call was made by High Command to instead shift the Tirpitz to Tromsø and park it there to defend the town from Allied attack. It sailed over 200 miles to Tromsø on October 15th under its own power. and Bomber Command began planning another raid to sink it straight away. The second raid took place on October 29th, and 40 Lancasters were sent for a 13-hour round trip from Scotland. The battleship was visible on the run-in, but the cloud soon covered it. Many tall boys were dropped anyway, but none scored direct hits. A small amount of damage was done by the bombs that detonated nearby. The final raid took place on November 12th, with only 33 Lancasters sent due to 7 unable to be cleared of ice and snow in time for them to take off at 3 a.m. This time was different. The sky was clear, no smokescreen, and the Tirpitz was spotted from 20 miles out. The Lancasters formed into gaggles of 4 to 6 aircraft staggered between 14 and 15,000 feet and began their bombing run. The Tirpitz began firing its anti-aircraft guns at 9:38 a.m. and 617 Squadron started its attack at 9:41 a.m. with the very first tall boy scoring a direct hit and exploding. When 9 Squadron began its attack 4 minutes later, the Tirpitz was on fire, covered in smoke, and already listing 30 to 40 degrees to port. Another tall boy struck the Tirpitz, but it didn't explode, and more tall boys exploded in the water, causing more damage. The last tall boy was dropped at 9:49 a.m, but its fate had already been sealed by the very first bomb, and at 9:52 a.m, the Tirpitz capsized. This marked the end for the heaviest battleship ever built by a European navy, and the loss of around 1,000 of the 1,700 crew on board. The Lancaster became famous for these raids, and it's hard to imagine them being a success using any other aircraft available at the time.